Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a world before, paintings or sculptures, where words were it.
The main way, sharing knowledge, history, beauty, all through language.
Exactly. And the sources we're looking at today kick off with this really incredible idea that this art of words, guiding thought with language, well, it might just be the highest, maybe even the oldest art form.
It's a powerful place to start, isn't it? That foundation built purely on language, shaping ideas way before we left marks in stone or paint.
Absolutely. And that idea, that's really the thread for today's deep dive. We're taking a journey basically through centuries of English literature.
From the very earliest whispers.
Right, all the way up to today's complexities. And we've got this great stack of sources you pulled together. They'll help us explore the key periods, the writers, the big ideas.
How it all evolved.
Our goal here is really to give you the shortcut. We want to pull out the most important bits, those surprising connections.
Find those aha moments.
Yeah, help you see the big picture. How English literature wasn't just like, poof, there it was. It grew, it reacted, changed over time.
Definitely. So, where do we begin?
Let's jump right in. The journey starts way back. Old English period, or Anglo-Saxon literature. We're talking, 5th to 11th centuries, roughly?
That's right. This was the language brought over by the Germanic peoples who settled England. And most of the writing we actually have from then is in the West Saxon dialect.
Okay.
Though, interestingly, the sources mention the main Beowulf manuscript might lean more towards a Kentish dialect. Little variations there.
And who is actually doing the writing, preserving this stuff?
Well, it was largely the monastic communities, the monks.
Right, centers of learning.
Exactly. And this literature really took off in the 10th century. The church was a major patron, so a lot of what survives is religious in nature, translations, sermons, things like that.
That makes sense, yeah. Before everyone could read and write. So what are the absolute must-knows from this foundational time? The big hitters.
Well, the undisputed heavyweight has to be Beowulf, the epic poem.
Right.
The sources date it somewhere between the 8th century and maybe a bit after 1000 AD.
Okay.
And what's really striking, the sources call it the only surviving specimen of a specific historical language and culture that was already 800 years gone by the time it was written down.
Wow, only one.
Yeah. It even traces lineage back to legendary figures like Scyld and Wulfgar. It's like a direct phone line to that ancient world.
That's incredible to think about, a text giving us that kind of window. What else stands out?
Well, we also have things like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle that's a historical record, Bede's ecclesiastical history, and some really important religious poems. The sources specifically highlight The Dream of the Rood, beautiful poem told from the perspective of the cross itself.
Oh, interesting. And this was also a time of huge transition, wasn't it? Going from oral stories, songs.
Exactly, to actually writing things down.
Yeah, on parchment.
And speaking of early texts, the earliest surviving English poem we have is Cædmon's Hymn.
Ah, yes, the story about the shepherd. The sources mention him. Illiterate, right?
Yeah.
And then gets this gift of poetry from God in a dream.
It's a powerful origin story for English poetry, definitely.
Yeah.
And the hymn itself, it's quite profound. The sources note how it uses these incredibly simple, accessible images to try and graft the sheer grandeur of creation.
Wow.
They even call it a reactions text, deeply tied to invoking the word made flesh.
So the style of this Anglo-Saxon poetry, what was it like? Formal?
Very. Rooted in the heroic tradition. Think strong rhythms, elevated language, formal stuff.
Okay.
And while it did become Christianized over time, it kept that powerful formal quality. But the sources point out, as we get towards the 11th century, and especially after 1066...
The Norman conquest.
Right. Latin and French start having a bigger influence, new poetic meters pop up. Old English really begins to shift.
Which perfectly sets the stage for our next big phase, Middle English. Kicking off dramatically with that Norman conquest in 1066 and running up to, about 1500?
Exactly. And that conquest wasn't just political. It totally reshaped the language.
Yeah.
French and Latin came crashing in.
Right.
And it started this long, kind of complicated process where English had to fight its way back, adapt, reestablish itself.
And the language changed so much. The sources have this amazing perspective by Chaucer's time, around 1400. English was almost as different from Old English as it is from the English we speak today.
It's a huge transformation, driven by a few things. More education, the printing press starting to emerge.
Huge impact.
Massive. And just the sheer influx of foreign words, foreign ideas into society.
And the result of all that churning, this explosion of writing, the sources say over 1,000 poems, 500 prose works.
It's incredible. Like once English found its footing again, writers just couldn't stop.
Yeah.
In the second half of the 14th century, that's often called the Great Consummation of Middle English lit.
That's when we see the big names emerge.
That's the literary revival. You've got Gower, Langland, obviously Chaucer, and the wonderfully mysterious Pearl poet.
Okay, let's talk about those giants. Geoffrey Chaucer first. Sources say London, born around 1340, son of a merchant.
A prosperous merchant, yeah. But his life was anything but sheltered. He served in noble houses. He was a soldier.
Got captured by the French, right?
He did. Exposed him to major French poets, like the one who wrote the Romance of the Rose. Plus, he held state offices, Controller of Customs, MP.
Wow. That must have given him just an unparalleled view of society. The sources call it a world of observation.
He saw it all, high and low. And that exposure is absolutely key to his work. Though the sources mention his career wasn't always smooth sailing, some political intrigue, temporary dismissals.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but he always seemed to land back on his feet in royal service.
He's described in the sources as the first poet to write in established English. That sounds huge. What makes his English established?
Well, it's partly his use of the London dialect, which was becoming the standard. But it's also the sophistication, the versatility he brought to it. He wasn't just writing, he was kind of shaping the language, making it stable, capable of expressing this huge range of human experience.
Yeah.
The sources praise his broad scope, the strength of his thought, giving his writings stability of sentiment.
He wrote, what, 32 poems? Popular with everyone, nobles and common folk alike.
Absolutely. And the sources give us a taste of his characters. The prioress, the shipman, the wife of Bath. Such variety.
Truly captured the whole panorama of life then.
He really did. Now, alongside him, we have the Pearl poet. The sources call this writer, working out of Chester, late 14th century, someone of extraordinary genius.
What's fascinating is how little we have from them. Just 4 poems, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, Cleanness, Patience, and Pearl.
Yeah, compared to Chaucer's output, it's tiny.
Yeah.
The sources stress, despite the quantity, the quality is off the charts. Masterpieces, all 4.
Tell us a bit about Sir Gawain. Starts at King Arthur's court.
Yeah, it does, yeah. They're waiting for the New Year's feast. And the sources point out this brilliant detail, how the prologue has this sudden change of mood, just grabs you.
Oh.
The poet directly invites the listener in, making you, as the source puts it, curiouser and curiouser about what challenge is about to burst through the door.
Ha. Love that. And Pearl is different from the others.
It is. The sources highlight it's the only one where the narrator speaks directly to the audience. It's about a vision, contrasting earthly beauty with the divine, emphasizing that it's God's beauty that matters.
Fascinating. Okay, so from Middle English, we leap into what's often called the Greatest Age, the Renaissance, roughly 1485 to 1660.
That's the one. An absolute explosion of creativity. Flourished under the Tudors and Stuarts. The sources use that lovely phrase. So many mighty poets flourished together.
A golden age, really.
It felt like it. You had figures like John Skelton early on called the King of Poets. But the name that absolutely defines the era maybe defines English literature itself.
Has to be Shakespeare.
William Shakespeare. Absolutely. The sources state he's arguably the most popular playwright ever. His plays are still performed more widely than anyone else's, globally, today.
And Ben Jonson's famous line, quoted in the sources, "He was not of an age, but for all time."
It feels true, doesn't it? And the sources explain why. It's his mastery of the human condition. His characters, Henry V, Falstaff, Titania, Bottom, they're described as both extravagant, larger than life,
And also relatable.
incredibly relatable. The sources say they reveal their raw emotions in extreme moments, often trying to figure themselves out why they do what they do.
That's what connects, I guess, across centuries.
Exactly. The sources use Henry V as a prime example. Written 1599, still packing theaters, set against that backdrop of war with France.
And inside Henry V, there's that amazing political detail right at the start.
Yes. The Archbishop and the Bishop, they're worried about losing church lands to a bill in Parliament.
Right.
And their solution: encourage the young King Henry to invade France, distract him, distract the nation.
Wow. It's a brilliant, kind of cynical move.
It is. A sharp reminder that Shakespeare wasn't just doing grand history. He was weaving in commentary about power, self-interest, real politics.
Beyond the stage, the Renaissance also saw a particular group of poets emerge in the 17th century.
Ah, the metaphysical poets. John Donne, George Herbert, Andrew Marvell, Henry Vaughan.
Okay.
The sources say their styles are kind of homogeneous, shared traits. but each poet is definitely distinct. And key characteristic they mention is sententiousness.
Wait, sententiousness? That sounds kind of preachy. What does it mean here?
Huh. Good question. The sources explain it as a quality of permanent significance, like they're exploring timeless truths, making their poems relevant no matter when you read them. And metaphysical itself just means beyond the physical.
So exploring abstract ideas, like philosophy.
Exactly. They'd take abstract concepts and link them to concrete physical things using these surprising comparisons. They're called conceits.
Right, conceits, like clever analogies.
Sort of, sometimes like witty little tricks, imaginative leaps.
And what big themes were they tackling with this style? Love, death.
Those were central, yeah. The sources highlight the allure of love, which they explored not just emotionally, but with, like, intellectual reasoning, trying to figure it out.
Okay.
And the shadow of death was huge, too. They were often trying to find some kind of final definition for these profound parts of life.
Okay, moving forward. The Restoration, 1660 to 1700, and then the rest of the 18th century. What shifts do we see now?
The Restoration, that's the period bouncing back after the Civil War and Cromwell, described as this lively mix, politics and literature, and a really strong influence from France.
French playwrights were big.
Huge.
Yeah.
Corneille, Racine, Molière, they were eagerly translated, imitated, led to this new kind of drama, often single plots focusing on these vivid, sometimes scandalous characters.
Fops and debauchees.
Fops, debauchees, painted dames, lots of intrigue. Though the sources are careful to add, there were also works showing better sides to life. It wasn't all scandal.
Sounds like a perfect time for satire to flourish.
Oh, absolutely. The sources mentioned pamphleting, political theories, party writing really taking off. You get Defoe, Swift, Pope, Dryden, Steele, Addison, masters of witty, often fierce critique.
And amidst all that, one figure towers above as arguably the greatest English epic poet.
That would be John Milton, active through a lot of this, 1608 to 1674. His life story is incredible. Sided with Parliament, the Puritans during the Civil War.
Wrote political tracts.
Yeah, like Areopagitica, powerful defense of free speech.
And he got into trouble after the Restoration, when the king came back.
He did. Sources mention he was arrested in 1660, had to go into hiding for 5 years.
But he produced his masterpiece, Paradise Lost, during all this turmoil.
Yes, published 1667, depicting the fall of man, Satan's fall. The sources rave about his unique, Miltonic blank verse.
How so?
Incredible intricacy, expressiveness. They call it the greatest English epic, suggesting even Homer and Virgil would have been envious. High praise.
His ambition was enormous.
It really was. The sources say he aimed for tragedy, but found his voice in epic, felt he had divine inspiration.
Now, the second half of the 18th century sees another huge shift. Satire is still going strong, but something else rises.
The English novel.
Yeah.
This is where it really starts taking recognizable shape. The sources point to works like Roderick Random, Peregrine Pickle in the late 1740s, early 1750s.
And the sources describe them with phrases like fantasy adventure and almost authentic autobiography containing personal history, hilariously impossible. Sounds fun.
Right. They were playing with the form. And they were popular, got decent reviews sometimes, but the sources also say some people found them objectionable, even pernicious and evil.
Whoa. Evil. Why such strong reactions?
Well, think about it. This form was new, revolutionary.
Yeah.
Often less elevated than poetry or drama, dealing with more ordinary, sometimes scandalous, lives in a more, well, realistic or mock-realistic way.
Okay.
It challenged the established literary tastes, the social norms. And that, as the sources hint, definitely ruffled some feathers.
As we moved into the late 18th, early 19th century, we get this powerful reaction against that 18th century order and restraint, leading to Romanticism.
Romanticism, a new era, the sources call it. All about emotion, individualism, the power of nature, focus on spectacular scenery, heroic individuals, subnatural wonders.
Nature becomes central, not just a backdrop.
No, it's a frequently visited friend, a source of inspiration, consolation, and the style just breaks free, abandons that controlled and restrained writing.
To express emotion in all its depth and splendor.
Yes, a real passion for beauty and truth found in nature and human feelings. And the sources pinpoint the key moment, 1798, publication of lyrical ballads.
Wordsworth and Coleridge.
The collaboration that really ushered in the age.
Giants of this first wave.
They were, both from the Lake District, interestingly. Lyrical ballads, and especially Wordsworth's preface to it, laid out the philosophy, a reaction against the turmoil and transition of their time.
French Revolution, American Revolution.
Exactly. Which led to some radical politics among the young men. including Wordsworth and Coleridge themselves, at least initially.
But they had different takes on things, different approaches.
They did. The sources describe Wordsworth using simple language about simple subjects. Nature, ordinary people, aiming for poetry that felt real, spoke to real emotions, spoke to everyone.
And nature for him was?
Almost spiritual, a transcendental force, source of wisdom, a benevolent teacher. But also, crucially, something mysterious, something you could not be comprehended fully.
And Coleridge, how did he see nature differently?
His writing, the sources say, was more like a philosophy, exploring emotional depths using symbol and myth, seeking that sublime feeling through depth and abstraction.
So nature for him was more symbolic.
Yeah, like a great symbolic image, maybe a mere reflection of a greater reality rather than the ultimate reality itself. But what united them was this deep understanding of both the beauty and peril of nature.
The sources also mention the next generation, the younger Romantics.
Right. Byron, Shelley, Keats. Lord Byron, born 1788. Difficult background, satirical verse, his masterpiece Don Juan.
Which he wrote while traveling all over.
Yeah, composed across multiple countries, the sources say.
Yeah.
And Percy Bysshe Shelley, born 1792. Radical ideas influenced by Milton, the earlier Romantics.
Okay, so moving firmly into the 19th century now, the Victorian era, 1837 to 1901, named for Queen Victoria. The sources call this a time of robust authority, pushing literature to new heights.
It was a period of just immense change, unending technological and social change, industrial revolution, cities booming.
And literature responded.
Absolutely. Victorian writers observed man, nature, and the universe, how they interacted, noticing the huge population growth, but also how humans were starting to curb, foster, misuse, and abuse nature. First signs of environmental concern, maybe.
Interesting. And the sheer amount of writing is staggering again.
It is. Extraordinary number of novels, poems, and plays. Huge diversity. But the sources really emphasize the novelists stand out in the Victorian era.
Okay, who are those giants of the Victorian novel? Dickens has to be top of the list.
Charles Dickens, absolutely, born 1812. And the sources really detail his incredibly difficult childhood. Poverty, father in debtor's prison.
Forced into factory work as a kid.
Yeah, degrading and humiliating labor. Truly awful.
And that must have just profoundly shaped him.
No question. The sources directly link it to his later focus on social injustice, the lives of the poor. He started as a reporter, then boom. The Pickwick Papers made him famous.
And the sources call him the greatest character writer of his time.
I think that's fair. Someone who didn't just observe, but analyze the English manners, depicted them profoundly and captivatingly.
His characters are just unforgettable.
They are. Sources say he tapped into the childish and honest parts of human nature. Oliver Twist, Tiny Tim, and Scrooge. Prime example of a heart turned to stone undergoing that great and far-reaching conversion. He covered so much ground, David Copperfield showing his depth, too.
Also central to this time, the Brontës sisters.
Emily, Charlotte, Anne. Writing from Yorkshire. Daughters of a parson, mother died young. Fewer works than some others, the sources note, but immense significance.
Charlotte's letters get a special mention.
They do. Described as showing women's wit, warmth, and vigor, despite limited education back then. Revealing how they scornfully cast aside those misogynistic attitudes towards women writers.
Powerful stuff. And George Eliot, pen name for Marian Evans.
A key figure, absolutely. Sources point out her empathy for characters very different from herself, socially, politically, and her broad intellectual interests, geology, natural history.
Her early novels were controversial.
Apparently so, according to the sources. Before her unique style gained her wider acclaim, she had that famous partnership with George Henry Lewes, and the sources highlight her essay, Silly Novels by Lady Novelists.
Right. What was she arguing there?
Basically, she was calling out superficial, badly written novels, specifically some being written by women at the time, defining silly novels as lacking realism, verisimilitude, and intellectual power.
So she was an anti-woman writer.
Not at all. The sources emphasize she was making a case for demanding the same high standards for women's writing as for men's, advocating for serious literature by women.
Okay. Now, as we hit the 20th century, the world fractures. War, rapid change, leading to modernism.
Modernism, yeah, a complex, disputed term, the sources say. But it definitely emerges from a watershed moment, a response to the increasing pace of life, and profoundly shaped by World War I.
That generation shattered on the fields of Flanders.
Exactly. The sheer horror, the horrific apparent meaninglessness of WWI, and then WWII later, it made many question everything. Basic assumptions about humanity, progress.
leading to these vehemently modernist tones.
Right. And in fiction, that meant a focus on the inner self, the consciousness of the soul, an urge to dig deeper. But often the story told was one of decline or degeneration, a sense of things falling apart.
And the style got really experimental.
Deliberately so. Elaborate style, often first person. Playing with grammar, punctuation, syntax, using irony to critique society. The sources call it an international body of literature defined by self-consciousness about modernity and radical formal experimentation.
Key figures: James Joyce, Virginia Woolf.
James Joyce, born 1882, renowned for innovative and experimental styles, stream of consciousness, obviously, and just his incredible use of language.
And his connection to Dublin is fundamental.
Absolutely central. Most of his work is set there, drawn from there, depicted vividly, but with this mix of deep and bitter love and critical, ironic detachment.
His own life fueled this.
The sources think so. Declining family, strict education, hating the ruling class, the church, censorship, all led to this determination to break free, portray life unfiltered. He relied on the flow of his thoughts, not just memory. Used diary forms, varied styles constantly, concerned with feminism, anti-imperialism, Irish nationalism too.
And Virginia Woolf, another
influential modernist writer, definitely, from a big literary family, known for novels like Mrs. Dalloway, To the Lighthouse, and powerful essays like A Room of One's Own.
She also used stream of consciousness.
She did, and the sources highlight how she used it to pull readers right into her characters' inner worlds, fostering empathy, often focused on very short time frames,
Right.
weaving mental activity with the external world, fluid, elegant style.
And her focus on gender issues.
Crucial. The sources note her focus on social standards and gender discrimination imposed on women. Her life and work are seen as deeply intertwined, inseparable, really.
Okay, after modernism, another tricky term, postmodernism, roughly 1960s onward.
Yeah, another disputed term. Definitions not always aligned, as the sources say. They even point out that stuff we might call postmodern can actually be found much earlier, Romantic era, even Melville's Moby Dick.
So what's the context for this shift?
Emerges from the cultural, economic, political, technological changes of the late 20th century. Aftermath of WWII. Emphasis on irony, uncertainty, alternative narratives, questioning big, overarching stories.
The sources mention a possible shift from high culture modernism to counterculture postmodernism.
They do, but quickly add that's controversial. Simplifying it risks ignoring a lot of other fiction. They offer this kind of slippery definition, postmodernism, as a meta set of all unclear, difficult to understand, and inexact explanations.
Huh. Oh.
We're just referring to the conditions marking a shift away from modernism. They even cite 1975 as maybe significant.
Two key figures the sources associate with this, Samuel Beckett and Thomas Pynchon.
Samuel Beckett, Irish writer, lived in Paris, wrote in English and French, best known for his plays, maybe, Waiting for Godot, Endgame, masterpieces, the sources call them.
But famously hard to pin down.
Exactly. Eludes labels like existentialism. He deliberately taunts narrative forms. Fragmented plots, characters with limited cognition, they don't really get what's happening to them.
A deconstructive approach.
Yeah. Resists easy understanding, demands distance. And the sources add this great detail. His characters can feel like surrogates for him, the Beckett man. And he's described as a fatalist with a great sense of humor.
Interesting mix. And Thomas Pynchon, mentioned mostly in a U.S. context.
Right, but included here. His novels, vast in scope, densely packed, varied styles, subjects, recurring concerns, technology's relationship to humanity, often dystopia, satire of paranoia,
Okay.
the importance of the past in a present that's forgotten it, and exploring narrative possibilities that resist one single explanation.
Sounds like he's wrestling with truth itself. Can we even find it?
Big time. Sources mention his profound doubts whether truth can be recaptured. But fascinatingly, also an epistemological optimism. An optimism about knowledge because it's impossible to have one grand narrative. He almost seems to celebrate chaotic and accidental convergence.
Wow. Okay, bringing us more or less to the present. Contemporary literature, sources say, becomes thoroughly cosmopolitan from the mid-20th century.
Yet from about 1950 on. Less tied to national borders. Nationalist writing still existed, sure, but voices like Sartre, Camotet, they echoed across national borders.
Yeah.
And contemporary theorists felt they had to describe their own age in their work.
The sources highlight Zadie Smith and Ian McEwan here.
Zadie Smith, noted as a novelist who actually says she prefers essays, and laments that essays are often seen as minor prose. Interesting perspective.
Yeah, and Ian McEwan, born post-war England, 1948.
Sources describe him using the English past to reflect on the present. a fascination with difference, huge range of subjects, childhood, suburbia, war trauma, British identity, cosmopolitanism. His novels have these encyclopedic dimensions, registering huge historical shifts, but always rooted in place.
And he chronicles shifts among a specific group.
Yes, the privileged post-war middle-class Anglo-Caucasian reading classes. The sources say he can evoke the charm of, say, Thatcher's Britain, but then reveal the hollow inside the greed, hypocrisy, turmoil. His novels engage readers searching for identity, living with complexity, showing history as patterns of constrained possibilities. His characters grapple with the English post-colonial predicament.
Looking back across this immense history, certain ideas just keep popping up, enduring threads.
Themes, yeah, absolutely crucial. Authors deliberately embed meanings. You have the grand themes, love, power, revenge from classical times, but literature explores so much more.
Like love and relationships, always central.
Immense scholarly attention paid to it. Sources talk about competing traditions for understanding love and how those tensions fueled creativity, especially in the late Tudor, Jacobean, Caroline eras.
And Shakespeare is the prime example again.
Has to be. Love is a prominent motif everywhere in his work, plays, and sonnets. Romeo and Juliet, the classic example, showing different kinds of love. That love at first sight motif, how love changes.
Another constant, war and peace.
Humans have always fought wars. Conquest, revenge, honor, feuds, endless reasons. But peace is equally vital. Literature reflects that duality.
And novels about war often focus less on the battles themselves.
Exactly. Sources note they often sideline descriptions of battles to focus on the human cost. Destruction, ruined lives, society's disintegration. War is this unprecedented catastrophe, robbing people of agency, of self.
Yeah.
There's even mention of a writer dreaming of showing war as utterly purposeless, maybe thinking about the Great War's trauma.
And war's impact on relationships, even away from the front line.
Big focus. The tremors, confusions, and implosions it breeds in human connections. Sources even note how writers use animals, children sometimes, to show the intensity of conflict's impact.
Finally, identity and self. Who are we? How do we define ourselves?
That thrives in literature. The sources use Junerize's fiction as a great example. Tension between historical identity, how society sees you, and psychological identity, how you feel inside. Her characters are often marginalized but seek recognition.
Her novel, Freedom, is mentioned.
Yes, chronicling a woman's life, showing how gender, race, culture construct consciousness.
Yeah.
And how that tension between your inner self and external forces can lead to moments of recognition that change how you see yourself, even hinting at a deconstructed plurality, a borderless, porous consciousness.
What an incredible sweep. Centuries of thought, creativity.
It's truly vast. As the sources say, you can't really put a single conclusion on it. English literature is this wide canvas depicting every known subject, every phase of character, all human conditions, just everything.
And it's global now, not just England. Sources remind us it has ardent worshippers everywhere, America, India, Australia, read and translated all over.
And the sources end on this hopeful note. Every year, new works of perfectly original genius discover new treasures of truth and beauty, finding new meanings in the best-known sayings, applying old wisdom in fresh ways.
Which brings us right back to where we started, that idea of the art of words, maybe the highest, oldest art, still guiding thought, leading to other forms. It's the bedrock, really. It just keeps building, shaping how we understand the world and ourselves.
So for you listening, here's a thought to maybe carry with you from all this. If English literature really does mirror all human conditions, and it's constantly finding new truths by applying old wisdom through this art of words, does that mean every historical period in some way perhaps got the literature it desired? Or maybe even the literature it deserved?